So with that, I'd like to introduce Councilmember Ken Broadway with the City of Rocklin. And Councilmember Broadway, would you like to say a few welcoming remarks?
Absolutely, and thank you, Gladys. First of all, I want to extend the apologies from Mayor Gallardo. Jill, unfortunately, about half an hour or so ago, ended up with a flat tire. And she was sitting on the side of the roadway not more than 15 minutes ago and let me know she was still waiting to get that tire switched out. So she apologizes for not being able to join us, but she will be joining us in one of our later meetings that we have planned. So again, she extends her apologies. But with that, I do want to welcome everyone. Again, my name is Ken Broadway, and I'm a council member for the City of Rocklin. I want to thank you for taking the time this evening to join us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of all of your busy schedules and joining us for the discussion today. As many of you know and or have experienced, traffic in our area is quickly returning, and we need to act fast before it gets worse. We know that having the right transportation infrastructure will protect the quality of life and keep Placer moving and flourishing. And I'm excited to have the discussion that we're having today about the priorities that we have in place and how we can work to make those happen. You know, we've been working on a number of key projects in the Rocklin area, such as the I-80 Highway 65 interchange, the Highway 65 widening, the I-80 Rocklin Road interchange, and a number of others. But it's an important part of the process that we get feedback from the community. We want to know your thoughts on the transportation priorities, and we want to find a way, working together, to get these projects implemented. So that's our purpose tonight. We know that being here to listen and contribute to the conversation will result in a plan that we believe is the most responsive in meeting the needs of our community. So thank you again. And Gladys, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Danielle. So just quickly, we'll go over the meeting agenda tonight. We will start with giving you a little update on kind of where traffic conditions are today. We will talk a little bit about the impact fees and what the role of the builders in the area are with regards to funding transportation projects. We're going to do a highlight of the regional projects within Placer region, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A session. And please do stay for the end of this meeting because we will be having a raffle. One of the things we wanted to do through this meeting was to be able to find a way to contribute to our local businesses in the area. So we are we'll be raffling off a gift certificate or a gift card for one of the local eating establishments. So stick around, you may be a winner. So with that, I'd like to introduce the project team, and we already met Councilmember Broadway, but Mike Lucan, who's the Executive Director with Placer County Transportation Agency, is with us this evening, and he's just waving. Aaron Hoyt, who's the Senior Planner with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And then Danielle Wood, whom you've probably been getting a number of emails from, is a Senior Project Coordinator with AIM Consulting, so she's been helping with the notification of these meetings. So now you know us, and now we'd like to—
Lucan, Executive Director of Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, and we'll use the term PCTPA because we have the longest name of any governmental agency I know. So if you hear that acronym, that's who we are. And who we are, you know, what type of an organization we are, if you've never heard of us, is we are a special district. We're actually the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Placer County. And we were created about 30 years ago by the county and its cities and towns. And our board of directors is made up of a representative from each of the cities, the board of supervisors, and a public member at large. Ken Broadway, your council member, is a member of our board of directors, and they meet the fourth Wednesday of every month, typically up in Auburn at the Domes, the County Administrative Center. But of late, of course, we've been meeting virtually, and actually we'll be having our first in-person meeting here coming up next, or at the end of this month. But we are a special district, so we're not the city, we're not the counties, but we're made up of the member agencies, as I listed previously. And our job is really to oversee transportation projects in the region and programs in the region, to plan for those in coordination with the cities and the county, and then to find money for those projects and make sure those projects are completed on time and on budget. Most of the regional projects, not most of, actually all of the regional projects that we've implemented since our inception, we have delivered on time and on budget or under budget or ahead of schedule. So we have that, knock on wood, that fortunate circumstance that we are very good shepherds. We think we are of the public dollar, and we want to make sure that we get projects that you want accomplished here in Placer County. We could go to the next slide. So we not only plan for Placer County, which is our area, and we include everything in Placer up to the Tahoe Basin, where we work with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, but mostly in the western part of Placer County, and most of our activity happens in the southern part of the county because that's where most of the population and transportation facilities are. But we also have to work in a much larger context because people are moving throughout the greater, or what we call the Northern California mega region, which is which includes the Bay Area and surrounding counties, and then the 6 counties of the greater Sacramento metropolitan region, and then again all the way up to Reno and Tahoe. And so we have to plan for Placer, but we also have to plan along with our partners for the whole of Northern California of where people are actually going. And this slide shows you the importance of that, is because or a good deal of the people in Placer County actually commute outside the county for their jobs and other resources, and some quite far, all the way into the Bay Area. So we plan regionally. We do what's called a regional transportation plan for Placer County that then filters up to a metropolitan transportation plan for the whole of the Sacramento 6-county region. And we look out 30 to 40 years into the future and plan for our highways, our bike trails, and other modes of transit in the region. And we do that, and we've been doing that for about 30 years. What's really important to note, though, is why we did that. Why are we separate from the rest of the Sacramento region? And that's because our predecessors felt it important that we control our own destiny here in Placer County, as opposed to having someone in West Sacramento or Davis tell us how to plan our roads and resources. We chose to do it here in Placer County, and it's worked very well for us. So if we could go to the next slide. The first thing that we're going to do is give you an update on where we are at with traffic congestion. And that's important because of the pandemic. And we saw a big downturn in traffic here in the region. But as you'll see, and as Aaron will describe to you, traffic is back. So go ahead, Aaron, take it away.
Great, thank you, Mike. We've all endured a number of changes and disruptions in our lives over the last year due to COVID. But we are seeing that our economy is opening back up. We have indoor dining again. Some of our kids are returning to school full time. And I believe this is the last Friday where we're actually going to have Friday night football for high school for this year. So there's a lot of things that are coming back to normal, or maybe it's a new normal. But one of the things, as Mike mentioned earlier, as well as Councilmember Broadway, is our traffic is probably returning the quickest. From a high level perspective, the overall miles that Placer County residents have that they drive since March 2020 has been down 20%. According to the data and analytics firm Replica, you can see on the screen, the amount of traffic or amount of miles that residents have driven has dropped from about 18 miles per day on average back in March 2020 before the stay-at-home order. And it's fluctuated throughout the time through 2020, through the summer and into the fall, and it had a dramatic drop in late November 2020 when the second stay-at-home order was placed. At that point in time, traffic was down about 50% in terms of the average miles us residents drive from March 2020. But we've seen since January 2021, as the stay-at-home order has been lifted, our traffic levels have increased sharply. We're now only 20% of where we were prior to the initial stay-at-home order. So let's take a closer look at Highway 65, which is a backbone of South Placer County. Overall daily traffic volumes on southbound 65 are about 6.5% lower than they were a year ago today. So this is tracking January 2021 to January 2020, and about 10.2% lower than they were a year ago in the northbound direction. Where we see the really noticeable changes that COVID's had on traffic is when we look at the time of day distribution. So you can see two charts here. One chart on the left is showing southbound 65. The other one on the right is showing northbound 65. The time of day distribution shows some interesting things from a planner's perspective, at least, of what's happening. We can see that the morning commute hour is no longer there. That blue line representing 2020 has shifted out to the right, meaning that the peak traffic is really occurring now more closer to 7, 8 o'clock than it used to be between the 5 to 6 a.m. Hours. You can also see that within these charts, there's a dramatic increase during the midday and early evening hours. This may be due to flexibility of a lot of the residents who are working from home now. They have more opportunities to do errands during the day, or maybe they're working earlier and ending their workday sooner. Also, what we notice is speeds on Highway 65. The speeds are higher than they've been before, back in 2020, even back in 2021. And that's because the congestion levels in January 2021 are just not there. Our traffic volumes aren't as high, so drivers are able to travel a little bit faster than they have been. And you can see this occurring both in northbound, southbound directions, but we see the differences and much more dramatic spikes occurring in the southbound direction, where some of our greatest traffic issues and bottlenecks are today. Moving over to Interstate 80, it's kind of a similar story to State Route 65. We're hovering right around that 90% of normal. I-80 westbound is approximately 9.8% lower than it was a year ago today. And Interstate 80 is about 10.2% lower. We see some similarities in terms of time of day distribution when we look at traffic volumes. On the left is Interstate 80 eastbound. We can see that, again, that blue line has shifted outwards in the morning hours, just because people aren't commuting to work down I-80 to downtown Sacramento as it used to be. But we see during those mid and afternoon peak hours, we're getting very close to what we were pre-pandemic in 2020 and even 2019 in January. We have some similarities that also occur in the westbound direction. Speeds, kind of same story. We're right there neck and neck, and you can see in 2021 right now, as of January, our speeds are as high, if not higher, than they were previously. That's just because as we drive I-80, we notice that there's not quite the congestion that we used to see. Thank you. So I'm going to take, there's a lot of complexities within transportation and how we fund projects. We regularly have 3 to 4 different types of funding sources on a project to make sure it's fully funded and we can get through construction. And one of those ways that we pay for our regional transportation improvements is through a regional impact fee program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And this regional impact fee program is very similar to how cities build fire departments, parks, roads, and other needed public infrastructure. The South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, or as we refer to it as SPARTA, was conceptualized in 2000. In 2002, the cities of Lincoln, Roseville, Rocklin, and Placer County formed this authority. The purpose of the authority was to collect fees on all new development to pay for their fair share of our most significant bottlenecks that were anticipated nearly 20 years ago. These regional fees are levied on all new development, regardless of the type of use, of whether it's residential, commercial, warehousing, or even schools. They're based on the amount of traffic each of the different types of development are estimated to generate. The fees can be considered the cost the new growth's impact has on the existing public infrastructure. For example, builders can be charged their fair share if they break a facility, if they add too much capacity to it. However, they cannot be charged to remedy the existing traffic problems. There are federal and state legislation that guides how we implement these impact fees. So you may be wondering, well, what are these regional impact fees that are being collected go towards? They go towards a number of multi-jurisdictional projects that benefit the entire region. These include the completed Lincoln Bypass, Highway 65 widening, Sierra College Boulevard, future Placer Parkway, and a number of other interchange improvements along Interstate 80. There's state and federal laws, as I mentioned, that regulate how these implementation of the mitigation fees are implemented. But the short version of this long story that's shown here in each of the 5 different steps is that we really need to identify what our existing deficiencies are. Where are our roadways already over capacity or transportation facilities over capacity? We also need to identify what future deficiencies may occur as the county continues to grow. And then we use that information to determine the fair share of new development's impact on those transportation facilities. And we use a traffic model to help us gather information and calculate what those deficiencies and fair shares would be. All this needs to be thoroughly documented and make sure that all the legal requirements have been met. As required by law, we use a travel demand model to help us estimate and calculate what those deficiencies are. The travel demand model is just a tool that we use to estimate future traffic levels. The model is really a complex series, though, of calculations and algorithms, but it can be boiled down to really 3 components. Those are the transportation options that we use to get around, the land uses and the types of land uses and where they're located within the region, and also how we move around and the assumptions on travel patterns. How long do people travel or commute to work? Are they driving by car? Are they carpooling? Are they using the bus or possibly the train? So we take all this information in and apply it to the traffic model in order to get these estimates that come out of it. So let me try to illustrate this a little bit better. So we take into account our land uses. We go through, we calculate all the households, we calculate square footage of buildings, and we can get a lot of this information from building records at the cities and the counties. We overlay this information about where our retail locations are, our homes, our schools, our parks, our warehouse, and industrial facilities. And we take all that information and we connect it with all of our roadways. We also link in our bikeways. We do know that a small percentage of population uses bike to get to work, or maybe they bike to the nearest transit stop. So we also include all of our transit routes in Placer County. We can then use all this information, as I mentioned earlier, to try to calculate changes and impacts new land use has on projects. So in this example here, we have our land use and our whole traffic model on our left. On the right-hand side, we have what we tested in a test case, which is what happens if we add a new roadway into this traffic demand model. So you can see the area that's in blue is a new link. That new link instantly has a lot of traffic on it, shown by blue. We can also see on this model illustration is that where we have traffic that has been diverted off of this, we can see that by the green. Those greens show that there's been a reduction in traffic. The pink areas also show that there's been a traffic change. So we can use a model to try to estimate what these impacts are, as well as the fair shares for new development. And in determining fair share, we have to look at what the capacity is of a certain roadway. In this location, we're talking about Highway 65. We already know that Highway 65 is over its capacity. The capacity is shown in the bar chart here, and the existing traffic is represented as a gray portion of that. The gray line across it is its capacity. It's only able to accommodate a certain amount of traffic per day. If we have a new development that comes in, adds additional traffic, shown in the orange bar, we now know and can be able to calculate how much new development's contribution is to the overall traffic that's on this facility. And this is the methodology in which we then attribute those future fees in the regional impact fee program to new development. So as we bring it back full circle to the South Placer Regional Impact Fee Program, we can see that the number of projects within this program are funded differently through the program. And it's all dependent on where the project is, where the land uses are, how much traffic is being generated. And so we can see that certain projects such as Highway 65 are being funded nearly by half through this SPARTA fee program. In other locations such as Sierra College Boulevard, where future development or development that started out when we implemented this program are paying nearly 100% towards those improvements. Overall, the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority's Regional Impact Fee Program will collect $196 million. To date, we've had about $65 million that has been collected and has been put towards projects. This program not only helps us pay for projects, but it helps us also to leverage state and federal monies, which we've been able to do with the Lincoln bypass that was previously completed.
For the meeting is, yes, we have $3 billion worth of projects that we need over the next 30 to 40 years here in Placer County. And again, a lion's share of those projects are right here in South Placer County. And it is also correct that 2/3 of those costs are paid for by the building community for commercial or residential development. Those are paid through either impact fees for regional improvements, as Aaron described with the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority, or they're paid in impact fees to each one of the cities that you live in, be it here in Rocklin, or if you lived in Roseville, if a house was built in Roseville, then they would pay that impact fee. But altogether, they pay for approximately 2 out of that $3 billion projected for the next 30 to 40 years. If we could go to the next slide. And what that really means is that in former times, we were able to, with those impact fees, we were able to match state and federal funding. When we came up with 10 or 20% of the cost of the project, the federal or state government would fund 90% of the project. And actually, the law is still that you have to come up with in California about 12% of the project. However, the problem is that we are growing, and the state is almost 40 million people. The nation is growing, and the Sacramento region is one of the fastest growing areas in the entire country. And so things are more competitive. And so to actually compete for that funding, the new norm, if you will, is that we have to come up with half of the money. And so that is kind of a minimum in terms of when you go and get money for things like the 8065 interchange or the Rocklin Road interchange. It is now, in order to compete against those other jurisdictions, you have to come up with 50% of the cost. And we don't have a local source of funding here in Placer County. And so that is very hard for us to come up with. And I'll give you some evidence of what it could be done in a few short slides if we were to have that local source of funding. 25 other counties in the state actually do have that source of funding, but we do not. Next slide. Well, you all will probably immediately then go to come up with, well, wait a minute, we just adopted a new gas tax just a few years ago. Isn't that supposed to come up with the money to pay for these roads and expanding our roadways? And unfortunately, the answer is no. SB 1, when the state adopted it, and it took them, oh gosh, almost 12 to 14 years to come up with a method to fund our roads. And but they were only able to solve half of the equation because it was very difficult to get agreement statewide on how to fund transportation. So they came up with half of the answer, very important half, and that is how to fix our roads. And we in the transportation community use the term fix it first. And so the state was able to solve fixing our existing roads, filling those potholes, replacing our old transit buses with new transit buses, maintaining our roads, dealing with pedestrian safety, and a very small amount for local congestion, but really only the very worst areas of our community or of our state can be funded with a gas tax, mainly around our seaports and very, very urbanized areas of the state. What it will not fund, however, is it will not fund the 8065 interchange. It will not fund the widening of Highway 65, will not fund the Rocklin Road interchange or some of the other key projects that we're going to talk about tonight. And so the gas tax, again, is very important because it helps us fix our roads. And we have a huge backlog in maintenance needs right here in Placer County, but it will not help us expand our roads, even though we and the rest of the state are expanding. You could go to the next slide. So to give you some examples of what would happen if we did have that money, and we were able to come up with some of the funding for some of our projects, and these are key projects. So these are a couple examples of, well, what would happen if we did have money to fund some of these projects. So if we go to the next slide, one of the key pedestrian walkway projects that we were able to fund up in Auburn was the Highway 49 sidewalk gap closure project. And we were able to do this because We were able to come up with the matching funds for this, and it actually at the time was the largest bicycle pedestrian project in the entire Sacramento region, and we are constructing sidewalks and other pedestrian routes along the Highway 49 corridor, all the way from Interstate 80, all the way up to the where the Highway 49 goes into the more rural parts of Placer County. A very, very important project, a very important project for safety and for solving some of the issues of accessibility in that area for schools and other resources, retail and residential development. And then another key project that we were just able to attract dollars for was a multimodal project along Interstate 80. And we were able to fund things like a new bus route from Lincoln to the hospital complexes in Roseville and then on to the light rail station. We were able to fund a couple auxiliary lanes along Interstate 80. We were able to fund a portion of a bike trail in Placer County and some other improvements. But the key message here is we were able to kind of ride on the coattails of Sacramento County, who we partnered with on this. Sacramento County has a transportation sales tax measure that they passed a number of years ago. And because we were able to utilize Sacramento County's match, we were able to get our projects funded. Very limited ability to do that, but that is a case in point that if you do have a local match, you can get these projects funded. Next slide. And one key part of that, as I mentioned, for Placer, is we got these things called auxiliary lanes funded. And there's 2 of those along Interstate 80, which are the last bottlenecks along Interstate 80 that we have not solved over the years. And one is right here in Rocklin in the eastbound direction from the the Highway 65-80 interchange to Rocklin Road. Primarily, it's an area of congestion, which is particularly severe when Sierra College is in session. A lot of traffic backs up all the way to the interchange. And then in the westbound direction from Douglas Boulevard to Riverside Boulevard, another area of severe congestion. We were able to fund those, but again, we were able to do that because we combined forces with Sacramento County and used their sales tax measure, their local source of funding, to get our projects funded. Next slide. So what are some of these projects that we've talked about in South Placer and Placer County? And I want to go through these a little bit, and then we would love again to hear from you on whether these priorities are appropriate or whether there are some things that we haven't thought about and we should add to the types of projects that we're pursuing. So the major projects in Placer County, and again, most of these are in South Placer County, are on this map here, one of which is the widening of Highway 65. The other one is the interchange, which we just got done fixing the first phase of that. The auxiliary lanes, which I just mentioned, we did get that funded. Another one you may have heard of is Baseline Road, to expand that from its current 2-lane configuration to 4 lanes and then eventually to 6 lanes all the way out to Highway 99. And then a project you probably haven't heard of, which is called Placer Parkway, which is a new limited access expressway from the Whitney Ranch interchange in Rocklin all the way to Highway 99. There we go. So if you can go to the next slide. So the project we just finished here in South Placer was phase 1 of the 8065 interchange. And as you know, at one time that was the worst traffic congestion in the region, and we actually added a lane onto the viaduct or bridge structure that goes across the ravine over into Rocklin and Roseville. We essentially expanded the bridge to allow that additional lane. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see we also were able to solve a very important safety issue, which is the expansion of the Stanford Ranch Road, Galleria Boulevard off-ramp. If you recall, not too long ago, when you tried to go from northbound Highway 65 to Costco, you had to take your life in your own hands to get across 4 lanes of traffic and into Costco, whether you're buying gas or buying a flatbed full of goods at Costco. It was very difficult to get across there. And so we solved that to its full build out condition to allow safe passage to retail and residential uses in Rocklin and in Roseville. Next slide. Well, we still have a long ways to go with the interchange. We solved the first part of it, and again, at the time, the worst part of it, but we still have a long ways to go. And the next few slides are going to show you what we have to add. We're essentially going to replace the cloverleaf with a bridge flyover. Instead of the cloverleaf that you currently make a very sharp right-hand turn on and curve around on the Highway 65, that will be eliminated, and a bridge structure will connect you to that viaduct in both directions. If we go to the next slide, we'll actually expand the connector ramps to and from the viaduct. And then the next slide will show you, we're actually going to be solving a very severe safety problem. As you know, the interchange, especially for people who have not utilized the interchange before, is a bit of a mess in terms of where to know where exactly you're going. And part of that's caused because we have, when this was originally built, when you have the Eureka, Taylor, and the interchange itself, they're actually too close together. And so we actually have to eliminate an off-ramp at Taylor Road, but we still have to provide access to Taylor Road because it's a very important entrance to Rocklin. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to take access at the Eureka exit and then on to Taylor Road. So again, it will eliminate that exit. It will improve what is called the weave. And that weave has actually led to 13 fatal accidents, mostly rear end accidents along the interchange. And we'll replace that with a very safe future build out of that interchange. And then the last slide shows you some minor expansion of the roadways underneath the interchange. So a long ways to go, but we very, very critical to, if not the most critical piece of infrastructure in South Placer. Next slide. And this is a artist rendition of what it will look like, again, when that is done with the flyover bridges, with the expansion of Interstate 80 underneath, with the connector ramps, and also with HOV lanes, which will connect to future HOV lanes on Highway 65 and add to that HOV lane network that already exists on Interstate 80. Next slide. Equally as important as the interchange is widening Highway 65, which is over capacity. Our predecessors had the foresight to purchase right-of-way for planned expansion of the roadway, so we don't have to purchase any right-of-way for either this project or the interchange, except for a couple small slivers, but very, very small right-of-way needs for these, because our predecessors planned for this with the expansion of our communities. And the first phase of this project, which is actually currently the worst traffic congestion in the region, in the Placer region, will be the expansion of southbound 65 from Blue Oaks to the Galleria. Interchange, Galleria off-ramp, excuse me. And then eventually what we will be doing is expanding Highway 65 to 8 lanes all the way from the Interstate 80 all the way to Blue Oaks Boulevard, and then to 6 lanes from Blue Oaks all the way up to the city of Lincoln. Next slide. Another roadway, which I mentioned earlier, was Baseline Road. This is a key alternate to Interstate 80. And for many years, this roadway has been planned for expansion. Right now, it's a 2-lane roadway for most of its extent. That will be expanded initially to 4 lanes, the entire length from Foothills Boulevard all the way to Highway 99, and then someday eventually to 6 lanes. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see an artist's rendition of the cross section of that roadway, which we're looking at 2 different alternatives. One is simply a roadway configuration, but probably more likely is a roadway configuration with a separated bikeway, which will connect a lot of the specific plans in West Placer County, connect those together to existing or planned bicycle resources in that area, and then also connect that to Sutter County. So it would give you not only a roadway access, which is very important, but also a continuous separated bike trail along its entire extent. Next slide. And then Placer Parkway, I mentioned this is one you might not have heard of, but you probably have seen the half-finished Whitney Ranch interchange right off of 65 in the northwest part of Rocklin. And that was constructed to provide access to the city of Rocklin. But eventually, as was planned back in the early 2000s, it would give you a expressway, what we call a limited access expressway. So it would function like a freeway all the way to from Rocklin all the way over to the Sankey Road interchange in Sutter County to provide a northern beltway access, if you will, from Placer County over to the Sacramento International Airport and the northern parts of Sacramento. Again, a very much needed roadway for the growth and development of Placer County. Next slide. We are actually finishing the final design of this $595 million roadway. That first phase is completion of that interchange. And then the roadway would extend over to Foothills Boulevard, where it would connect to Foothills Boulevard in the city of Roseville. And we're hoping to start the construction of that in 2023. Next slide. Well, equally important to our regional roadways are local roadway projects, and so we have many of these that need financial resources here in South Placer and Placer County. Probably one of the most important of which is the Blue Oaks, the Blue Oaks interchange and the Rocklin Road interchange. Those two interchanges are critical to get people to and from the two cities of Rocklin and Roseville. And so we need to widen Blue Oaks Boulevard over the Union Pacific Railroad in Roseville, and we need to increase the size of the Rocklin Road interchange. I mentioned we received the funding to clear up the bottleneck on Interstate 80, but we need to be able to access and get people on and off Rocklin Road in and out of the city of Rocklin. Very important. And there's some other ones listed here too, Horseshoe Bar Road in Loomis, and some other interchanges up in the Lincoln area. Next slide. And then Rocklin itself has a number of projects. These are very important projects within the city of Rocklin. You probably recognize the names of some of these roadway and bicycle trail projects in your community, such as the roundabout on Pacific Street, which hopefully will start construction here very soon, and trails in the Sunset area. But very, very important projects that we have to help the city of Rocklin fund in order to get people moving throughout the community. And these are the projects that are in the city's capital improvement plan for transportation right here in Rocklin. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about roadways, but we as equally as important, and especially when we looked at the pandemic, we saw a lot of people utilizing our what we call alternative modes or alternative transportation program projects such as bicycle and pedestrian routes. And so you see here a map of the city of Rocklin's bicycle pedestrian system. And they have a network of trails and bicycle ways throughout their community, both class 1, which is separated from the street, and class 2 and class 3, which are combined with roadways. Very, very important that we work with the city of Rocklin on to solve its net and to build its network of bicycle and pedestrian routes. Next slide. And then we look at how do we connect these to a regional system. And in Placer County, or excuse me, in Sacramento County, you've all heard of the American River Bike Trail, but you may not have known that we're actually trying to build the equivalent to the American River Bike Trail right here in South Placer County, and that's called the Dry Creek Greenway, which will connect Roseville and eventually Rocklin to a northern bikeway system, which would go into northwest Sacramento County through the Ueda Trail and then down to the American River Bike Trail. So you would eventually someday have a very wonderful network, which would have a northern beltway, if you will, of a bicycle system connecting to the existing American River Bike Trail system. Next slide. And you can see the beginnings of this already. This is down in downtown Roseville, what's called the Downtown Bridges Project, which is the beginning of that very wonderful bike trail that'll eventually connect. It'll go all the way from Granite Bay through Roseville, connect into Rocklin as well, and then all the way over through Placer County, and then again connecting into Sacramento County system. Next slide. We're also trying to connect the cities within Placer County as well, connecting Lincoln and Rocklin and Roseville down to these regional bicycle networks. But right here in Placer County, it's very important that we connect our own bicycle network right here in Placer. Next slide. And then we have a lot of gaps. Bicycle facilities, some may think are more simple projects than a roadway. In many cases, they aren't, because a lot of times they have to cross private property or they're near environmental resources like our creeks and streams, because that's where we like to bicycle and walk and look at things. Well, that makes those a very, very complicated resources for transportation, but very necessary ones. And so a lot of times what we're doing is filling in the gaps of those both off-street and on, and this map shows on-street facilities, trying to put those that puzzle of bicycle facilities together so people can have a continuous bike trail system from one part of the community to another. Next slide. Another part of our non-single occupancy vehicle system is our transit system. In Placer County, if we go to the next slide, we have 3 transit operators here in Placer. We have Placer County Transit, which services the city of Rocklin and connects our communities such as Auburn and Lincoln down to Roseville and then down to Sacramento. We have Roseville Transit, which serves the city of Roseville, and then Auburn Transit, which serves Auburn, the city of Auburn and the areas around that. Next slide. We also have a very robust commuter service. And when I say robust, I mean prior to the pandemic. The pandemic is certainly challenging our public transit system, but before the pandemic, we had 14 trips from Placer County to downtown Sacramento, where the largest employer in the region resides, the state of California. And those were very, very popular bus routes. So popular that many times you had to stand all the way from Placer County down to Sacramento if you didn't get on the first stop of that commuter bus system. So as we restore service in Placer County, as employment comes back online, we have to find a solution to our commuter bus system and expand that service because it is very, very well utilized. Next slide. Another very well utilized service is what we call our door-to-door services. In Roseville and in Placer County, we have dial ride services, which provide access to those that can't use or can't access the fixed route system, especially those that are seniors and disabled users. And those will pick you up from your door and take you to your point of destination and back. And in Auburn, they have a variation of that called the deviated fixed route service, where the existing fixed route will deviate to your home. And then we have another service in Placer County currently called My Rides, which will be changing soon to something called possibly to something called Placer Rides, which is a medical service of which it provides to seniors and disabled persons rides from their homes to medical facilities, both here in Placer County and also in Sacramento County, to our larger medical facilities. And then as I'm going to talk about here in a couple of slides, we also have we're also looking at a future type of use called microtransit, which is kind of a combination of Uber and Lyft and public transit. Next slide. And why we're looking at alternatives right now is actually before the pandemic, we saw a very, very steep decline in ridership. And that's due to a number of factors. A lot of it is due to things like it's very easy to acquire an automobile for almost $0 down. You can acquire an automobile and a number of other factors. But really the key thing here, and the one thing that we can do something about, is that public transit, as it was originally configured, no longer provides people the easiest way to get to where they want to go. And so they simply choose to use a single occupancy vehicle. And as a result, over the last 10 years here in Placer County, and actually nationwide, except for in our most congested cities and most densely urban cities, we saw a severe change in ridership. And so we're going to start looking at something different. And the next slide, as I mentioned before, we are looking at something called microtransit, which is like Uber and Lyft. It would use a smaller vehicle, a cutaway vehicle, which is the vehicle at the top left, or even something as small as a van, that within a designated geographic area, it would actually take you from your home or nearly from your home to a appointed destination and then take you back. Excuse me. And so this is a new service that we're going to be looking at the feasibility of doing in our more suburban communities, such as Lincoln, Rocklin, and Roseville, and possibly up in the Lake Tahoe region, and even in the city of Auburn, as an alternative to get ridership up on this important on public transit, which is very important to our system of getting people to where they go in the county. Next slide. And then the last bit of public transit that we have is the Capitol Corridor. As was mentioned in a question earlier here today, the Capitol Corridor is actually it was prior to the pandemic, the most successful intercity rail system in the entire nation, which gives people the ability to go from Auburn all the way down to San Jose. In Placer County, we have one train per day in each direction, but it's supplemented by luxury coach service from our communities down to the Sacramento station, where it would connect and then go down to the Bay Area and down to the Silicon Valley. Our hope, if we go to the next slide, is to expand that service so that we have initially an additional 2 daily round trips to Placer County and to the Roseville station, and then eventually 10 daily trips to the Roseville station as well. And you probably ask, well, why to the Roseville station? Well, unfortunately, in most of Northern California, Union Pacific Railroad owns the railroad right away, and they would allow us to go to the Roseville station initially, and hopefully at some point in the future, we can expand that to Rocklin and then up to Auburn and maybe other places in Placer County. But initially, we're going to be able to expand that to the Roseville station, where that bus service would take you to Rocklin or other destinations. Next slide.
Gladys, thank you so much. And first of all, I want to thank both the AIM team and our team from PCTPA for your time putting this together and sharing with us this information. Most importantly, though, I again want to thank those who participated in today's discussion, providing us with your thoughts, because your feedback, your thoughts help us as we work hard to keep Placer moving. And it's through your insight, your effort, and the collaboration of all of us that we basically can move better in Placer. So thank you again, everyone, for your participation. Greatly appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Gladys.
Thank you, Councilman. And Mike, do you have any last comments?
No, just again to thank everybody for participating. You mentioned the other meetings in other parts of the community. There's actually 2 more in Rocklin. We actually have a total of 4 in Rocklin. There's one up, if you know somebody that lives up in the Whitney Ranch area, there's a meeting up there, and also in the area around Park. And I'm going to get this wrong, Park Boulevard in Rocklin. There's also a meeting in that area as well. And so check out the schedule at keepplacermoving.com, and we'd love to have you or some of your friends participate in some other meetings as well.
And Mike, it's Park Drive, but
Drive,
you focus
yes.
on, focus on 65 and 80. I'll take care of the streets in Rocklin.
I knew I was going to get that wrong. So.
Okay, with that, we'd like to thank you again, and please join us in another meeting and enjoy the rest of your evening.